a division with 3 new head coaches, a division with 4 very young quarterbacks. Yes, it is the NFC East, and today we are breaking down this division. A big what's up from Michigan. I'm Andrew Wilbar. Again, as always, be sure to like this video, share this video on social media, and subscribe to this channel. Be sure to tell your friends, bring them back here to grow the channel. And if you have any fancy questions or comments, put them in the comment section. I will answer them on the next video. We do not have any today, but this video is also being taped not too long after the previous video was published. So if you got a question in late, that is fine, and I will answer it on the next video. Since we did not have any today, if you did put in a question on the previous video, I will answer it on the next one. But as always, keep those questions coming. I love answering your fantasy questions. Like I said, the NFC East today, we're going to start at the bottom of the division like we always do with the Washington football team. I'm not going to get into, my take on, everything going on with that franchise. That's for something different. If I want to, express my opinion on those issues, I will create another video, but these videos are specifically for fantasy football predictions, stuff like that. So I'm going to keep those two things separate and just stick to the football. I have Washington going 2-14. I do not think there's a whole lot to get excited about this team. Ron Rivera is a pretty good coach. The defensive line should have, several years ago, should have already been over the top. They brought in Chase Young with the number 2 overall pick. They brought in some help in the secondary, not a bunch, but they did bring back Kendall Fuller, former slot corner, who has played his best ball in Washington. And then on the defensive line, we already mentioned Chase Young, Jonathan Allen, former highly touted player out of Alabama, and Daron Payne, another Alabama defensive lineman. They have a loaded defensive line. I don't know why it hasn't gone over the top yet. If Chase Young can produce year one, which I'm a little bit hesitant about, they could be a reliable fantasy defense. But their secondary is still suspect. They still have, a hole at safety next to who they brought in, the former Giants safety. The name's slipping me at the moment. But they still have a lot of holes on this team. On offense, Dwayne Haskins, I have a feeling they're going to be in the quarterback market in the 2021 draft. Nothing against Haskins, but there's limitations, his physical limitations. He just doesn't fit where the NFL is trending towards. He doesn't have a lot of help. The weapons aren't fantastic there. I think they're a little bit underrated in Washington. But the running game's not going to be of any help. We don't know what Darius Geis's health is going to be like. Adrian Peterson has got to be nearing 40 by now. Bryce Love, maybe he comes out of nowhere, former running back from Stanford, who had some Heisman Trophy consideration a few years back. Chris Thompson, I believe, is still there. But there's nothing that for sure in that backfield. At the receiver position, we're going to get into one of my favorite guys in the later rounds in a few minutes. But, of course, Terry McLaurin is a guy who is falling into the middle rounds in most drafts. And he's bringing really good value, especially in non-PPR formats. May not be the greatest in PPR, but downfield threat, he already has that rapport with Dwayne Haskins. They don't have a whole lot at the tight end position. The offensive line is still in shambles. They lost Trent Williams. I do, however, like the rookie Sadiq Charles out of LSU. He's raw, but I like the potential there of him being a possible left tackle, but possible replacement for Trent Williams. But it sounds like they're going to play him on the right side for now. I don't know if that's going to work out or not. But as I always do, I'm going to give you some nuggets of advice or bold predictions for the Washington Redskins. Steven Sims will be a top 35. 35 is a weird number. Let's make it top 30. A top 30 fantasy football wide receiver by the end of the year. Yes, I said it. Steven Sims, second-year pro out of Kansas, undrafted rookie who, if you can go back behind the steel curtain, my fan post articles over a year ago, I was talking up Steven Sims. I love Steve Sims. He reminded me of Antonio Brown. I compared him to him multiple times, and I still like that comparison. He's an excellent route runner, very quick, good hands, very good awareness in the middle of the field. I really like this guy. I like this guy's upside. He was way undervalued, and I'm excited to see where Steve Sims can go. The ceiling is really high. I've talked to some Washington fans that think he can be at least a good wide receiver 2 for them. And I'm really high on him as well. I think he and McLaurin can be a good 1-2 punch. Sims, I do think, can be a top 30 fantasy wide receiver by season's end. He's a guy that you can take in the later rounds of your draft. Nobody's drafting him. But if you can pick him up off the waiver wire and you're really thin at wide receiver, he's a guy that I think he could be a fantasy gold mine. He could bring you good flex help most weeks. Towards the end of the season last year, his numbers really went up. Go and look at his fantasy numbers the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Trey Quinn, there was one of their slot receivers having some health concerns. I think Paul Richardson, I don't even know if Paul Richardson's still there. He's not going to be any relevance in fantasy land. Antonio Gibson, the rookie they brought in, probably going to be more of a running back type player, but he can play some out of the slot as well. But this is open for Steve Sims. They're going to be passing a lot, and someone else has to pick up the targets that Terry McLaurin does not get. And I think Steven Sims is going to come in and be a really good number 2 for Washington and a top 30 fantasy wide receiver for you fantasy owners out there. So 2-14 for Washington. Moving on to the New York Football Giants, I have going 5-11. And now that I'm looking at it and stuff, I would probably have the Giants a little bit higher than this just because Daniel Jones did show a lot of promise. If he can just cut back on the turnovers, he had, 22 fumbles or something outrageous like that last year. If he can just cut back on that, he's already progressed greatly just for 1 year, and that's all he has to do. He doesn't have to throw for more yards, doesn't have to throw for more touchdowns or anything. All he has to do is cut back on the turnovers, and the Giants should be an almost 500 team. So now that I look at it, I think they can be a 6-10, 7-9 team. I made these predictions a while back. I had to make them for the whole league. You can't have, some of each. You can't have, an uneven wins and losses. So you kind of have to do the whole league at once. But if I had my picks back now, I'm looking, at all the divisions and stuff. Maybe I'd have Atlanta a game lower. Maybe the Lions or Bears a game lower. Any of those. I could see them going lower, maybe moving the Giants up 1 win. I haven't looked super close at their schedule. But really, if you look at this team, they have a good young core with Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram, and they're bringing in Joe Judge, a person from New York from New England who brings discipline to the table. Very good special teams. I expect them to be fundamentally sound. And as a Steelers fan, I'm sorry to say this, Steelers fans, but I'm predicting a Week 1 loss to the New York Giants. Yes, no preseason. Steelers struggle sometimes at the start of the season. When Mike Tomlin sometimes, they sometimes start off a little bit slow, his teams. Joe Judge coming from New England, built on preparation, getting you ready for every situation. I really think that bodes well for the Giants. Steelers having to go to MetLife Stadium. I really think the Giants have a good chance of knocking off the Steelers Week 1. But 5-11, I think, I don't think the Giants are there yet, but they're going to give Joe Judge some time. I think Dave Gettleman's done an underrated job building the team. They knocked him when he took Daniel Jones over Dwayne Haskins. Looks like that was the right call. Still, Saquon Barkley is a great player. Still debatable whether you should have taken him number 2 overall, but still, very good running back. He's going to be a cornerstone of that team for a long time. The defense has still got a long ways to go. But for fantasy advice, I am going to say Evan Ingram, a tight end I've talked about a lot, can be a top 5 fantasy tight end if healthy. But my another one that I want to talk about is Daniel Jones, who we haven't touched on a lot. We've talked about Ingram a lot. Haven't talked about Darius Slayton a whole lot. But one guy, Daniel Jones, I've mentioned a lot of these other quarterbacks, Drew Lock, Joe Burrow, Ben Roethlisberger, these later round quarterbacks that could bring you good value. Well, Daniel Jones is a guy I haven't really talked about a whole lot just because he has a little bit different skill set, and he does need to turn down the turnovers a bit, but I think he can be a top 15 fantasy quarterback. That isn't, I know, probably a Super Bowl prediction. A lot of people are predicting top 15. I don't want to go quite to top 10 because I want to see him hold on to the ball better. I want to see the offensive line protect him better, though. That was the biggest thing. He was running for his life all year last year. I mean, it was ridiculous. Nate Solder looks beat. He is done. I mean, I think they're moving him to right tackle, and they're going to try Andrew Thomas at left tackle, who I really like, rookie out of Georgia. But something's got to change with that offensive line. Will Hernandez, player 2018, I believe, out of, wasn't New Mexico, but UTEP or something. A lot, they've invested a lot into this offensive line. It still hasn't been fixed. But overall, I think the Giants can be, with a new 7-team playoff format, they can be a potential wild card contender, but all depends on, well, partially the defense, if they can hold anyone to under 30 points a game, but Daniel Jones being able to hold on to the ball, and that's really what's going to determine the fate of the New York Giants in 2020. The Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I'm hoping that Stephen Poore will chime in this one, our resident Eagles fan. I have them going 9-7, and I know he's probably going to say they're going to be better than that, but here's why. Darius Slay was a nice addition. They still don't have a number 2. Avonte Maddox I do like, and I think he's a very underrated player, but I have some concerns of whether Jim Schwartz is putting him into the best position to succeed. At safety, they lost Malcolm Jenkins. They're thinking of playing Jalen Mills, I've heard, starting to play Jalen Mills at safety some. He definitely has a fail at corner. I don't know if he'll be any better at safety. They added Kayvon Wallace in the draft. Davion Taylor is a guy from Colorado who's going to probably have to play some linebacker for him. The cupboard's pretty thin there. The cupboard's pretty empty there. But he can also play safety. He has really good speed. He ran a great 40 at the combine. But the defensive line is what is going to make or break this defense. Last year, it wasn't that great. They didn't get a great push in the pass as a pass rushing unit. They brought in Javon Hargrave, nose tackle formerly of the Steelers, who I really liked, coming out of South Carolina State. A great pass rusher for a nose tackle. He's going to be great next to Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. I mean, that defensive line is probably the best in the NFL now, but I want to see Fletcher Cox step up. Last year when I watched him, I mean, he was solid against the run, but where's the continued pressure on the quarterback? I saw him push the pile every now and then, but they weren't getting the amount of sacks that I was hoping they would produce. Their quarterback pressures have to turn into sacks this year if this defense wants to become a top 10 defense, which, if you're looking at them in fantasy, they probably are on that tier 2 level. We talked about that in a video probably about a month ago, about where do you put the Eagles in terms of fantasy defense. It's probably on that tier 2. But my fantasy advice is avoid Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz is a bust candidate. Dallas Goedert is an emerging tight end, is gaining a lot more reps each year. I remember when he was drafted, and I think it was Drew Pearson or whoever, no, that was actually for the Cowboys. He was the one that was trash-talking the Eagles, and then they had some former kicker of the Eagles or someone go up and trash-talk the Cowboys picks and stuff, and then the pick was Dallas Goedert. Everyone thought, oh, the Cowboys are going to pick Dallas Goedert. They need a tight end so bad. Dallas, the name, Dallas, the team, it's, such a perfect fit. And I remember I couldn't believe that the Eagles took another tight end because, you have Zach Ertz there already. But Goddard, on most other teams, would probably be a top 10 fantasy tight end for sure, maybe even top 5. He's that good. He can do it both ways as well, has some blocking ability. But I'm worried about Zach Ertz. A lot of turnover. They brought in a lot of speedy receivers. Receivers that I think Carson Wentz is going to try to take advantage of downfield. We'll see what happens with the fallout of Deshaun Jackson in Philly with his comments he made, his disturbing comments. Alshon Jeffrey is still there. I don't know what to expect from him anymore. They have a lot of rookies. Quez Watkins, rookie from Southern Miss. Of course, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, a guy that nobody's really talking about, but he was drafted in the second round last year. A guy that Howie Roseman seemed to really appreciate as a big-bodied weapon in the red zone, second-year pro out of Stanford. He actually ran a good 4. I believe he ran a 4.49 at his pro day, which I know pro day 40 times, you can say whatever you want about them. But for the most part, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside does bring some upside to the table as a red zone weapon, which is something that the Eagles don't have outside of the tight end position. And he's going to probably take a few targets away, not a bunch, from the tight ends. But having both of those, I think, having Dallas Goedert there limits both Goddard's own ceiling and Zach Ertz's ceiling. So that's why I'm not taking any Eagles tight ends this year. I have Mark Andrews ahead of Zach Ertz. I would honestly be tempted to take Evan Ingram ahead of Zach Ertz, simply for that reason. Maybe not in PPR, but in non-PPR, which is what I prefer, I'd be a little bit hesitant about taking Zach Ertz, and I think you should be as well. Finishing off this division with what I think is ridiculous. They are not America's team anymore. They haven't been relevant for 25 years. The Jerry Jones Dallas Cowboys. or the Cowgirls if you are Steven. I believe he would agree with me by calling them the Cowgirls. I have them going 10-6. And I know I'm going to get eaten up by any other fan in this division. The fans are crazy in this division. From Washington fans, Giants fans are crazy. Eagles fans are nerdy. I'm going to get chewed up by someone in the comment section. I expect it this time. But the Cowboys, I have going 10-6. And don't get me wrong. I was high on the Eagles last year. I've been right on this division for a while. I was higher on the Eagles last year. I was low on the Cowboys. I thought the Cowboys were not going to be as good as people were pumping them up to be last year. I was right. Last year, I picked the Eagles to win the division. Look what happened with a depleted roster with only 2 receivers active on the roster, whatever they had last year. The Eagles still won the division. But this year, I finally think Dallas wins it. Not because they're great, but just because I think the Eagles are going to take a slight step back on offense. Just with a lot of new weapons, there's nothing solidified there. And with the Cowboys, they did bring in CeeDee Lamb, which I remember, because Steven is a friend of mine. I remember texting him on draft night after CeeDee Lamb was drafted by the Cowboys. He wasn't happy at all because he was hoping, CeeDee Lamb would fall to the Eagles. Of course, them being in need of a receiver, they ended up taking Jalen Reagor instead, which didn't go over well with them. Jalen Hurts is the other one that didn't go over well with them, but there were actually some rumors of the Cowboys maybe being interested in Jalen Hurts, but now I'm going on a rabbit trail. Back to the Cowboys' 10-6 record. The secondary, they lost Byron Jones, and I really think that knocks everything out, that they've done. They brought in, I don't know, they brought in a couple corners in the draft. Still, the only corner that I'm really super comfortable in is Chidobe Awuzie, and I don't think he can be a number 1. I think he is a legit number 2. I liked him coming out of Colorado back in 2017. Really solid corner. Good cover man, can really play up towards the line, can GM receivers at the line. In the slot, they still have Jordan Lewis, former corner from Michigan, but they're pretty empty in the secondary, to be honest with you. I know Jamal Adams has been toyed around. Maybe they make the trade for Jamal Adams. There is no way they can do that. They don't have any more cap space. They're still trying to figure out things with Dak Prescott. They've paid so many players on offense. The offensive line, they lose Travis Frederick, which could affect Zeke Elliott. They brought in Tyler Biadasz, who is one of the better centers in this draft, but still a rookie in a shortened offseason. I don't think that offensive line is going to be quite as good this year. And it's already been going downhill. The defensive line, they have DeMarcus Lawrence. They brought in that one guy back from 2012 who had 20 sacks. He's been on marijuana ever since and hasn't been in the league in 5 years. And that's really what the Cowboys do, bringing in those types of guys. I will give them credit. After the first round, which I wasn't a huge fan of the CeeDee Lamb pick, their draft was really good. They got a lot of starters. Neville Gallimore brings some potential at some point. Dontari Poe is a guy I was praying the Steelers would sign. He would have completed this defense. If the Steelers would have signed Dontari Poe, I would be predicting the Steelers to be in the Super Bowl right now. Hands down. I think he would have made that big of a difference. But Dontari Poe, I know that they want to run a little bit more 3-4 under this new scheme led by Mike McCarthy. Of course, him being more of an offensive mind, but they're going to be running more 3-4 this year. But for my fantasy football advice, Greg Zuerlein will be a top 3 kicker. I'm sure that's the fantasy advice all of you wanted to hear. Blake Jarwin, I don't have really any feelings on. I would say avoid Michael Gallup. CeeDee Lamb really eats into his target share. I think Amari Cooper's still pretty safe. He and Dak have always had a pretty good relationship. But my other guy, I've talked about this before on several videos. Ezekiel Elliott is being slightly overdrafted. Don't take him in the top 5 picks because Mike McCarthy has never been committed to running the football in any of his offenses. This is the first year that I'd actually be willing to take Dak Prescott on my team. Every other year I've said, oh, he's a bust, he's overrated, and I still think he is an overrated quarterback, to be quite honest with you. But because of the weapons he has around him, I think he can actually be a really good quarterback in Mike McCarthy's system. Remember the Aaron Rodgers, I know he didn't get along well with McCarthy, but McCarthy really aided in a lot of Rodgers' fantasy production. From a fantasy standpoint, they were throwing the ball so often. And that put a lot of pressure on Rodgers. And it may happen to Dak as well over time. But it wouldn't surprise me if Dak put up Aaron Rodgers-like fantasy football numbers. And when I'm talking the Aaron Rodgers we knew of, 4 or 5 years ago, he could become into that elite tier of fantasy quarterbacks. but I wouldn't break the bank for him because of the depth at quarterback, and I mentioned the depth at quarterback on previous videos, so no need to get into that. But we pretty much touched on everything I want to. If you guys have anything else you want to add, we've gone 20 minutes now. Put your questions or comments in the comment section. It doesn't even have to be about this division. We only have 2 divisions left. The Steelers division, the AFC North, and the AFC South. I believe next time we'll do the AFC South and then finish off, me being a Steelers fan, we'll save the best division for last. But that's going to do it for today. As always, be sure to like, share on social media, subscribe, tell a friend, tune in, all of that good stuff. Thank you all for watching. Always appreciate you guys. Keep tuning in. We'll see you next time.